can't remember a time where it's been this divisive, the state of the game in terms of holding the ball in particular. But I just think across the board there was some really ordinary examples of umpiring on the weekend. Now, I'm not blaming the umpires necessarily, but there has been a crackdown on 50-metre penalties. A lot of those led to goals. A lot of those, I think, are soft and are not deserving of a goal against, but certainly that's.
But if it's in the rules, that's the rules.
But is it in the rules? Like, because some are paid and some aren't. So this is the issue that we've got.
But that's an umpiring issue. If the rule is there, it has to be paid. You can't pay it dependent upon what the clock says. Is it round one? Is it grand final? If it's 50 metres, it's 50 metres.
So Vandermeer knocks the ball out of McLean's hands when I think he is in the marking. In fact, I didn't even think McLean necessarily held it for that long to even be considered a mark, and he knocks it out 50-metre bang. And that for me set the tone for the week. Saw some others yesterday, like Zane Zorko was caught up in a marking contest, and it felt like the opposition player had him hooked.
I thought it was a good decision.
I think it's far.
He had one thing in his mind.
What do you think? You think he's that silly?
He was delaying. He was delaying. I mean, he grappled him.
I thought it was equal parts blame.
No, he had no right to be grappling, and if he did, he held on way too long. Can I just keep going on this prior opportunity? Now, I just saw Steve McBurney doing the usual interview with afl.com.au, and it's the first time I saw it, and his explanation with the lazy Susan non-free kicks, where there's a 360 or a 540, was, and I think I'm not putting words in his mouth, but he said that if you're tackled, because he was tackled, he was given a reasonable amount of time to get rid of the ball. So there's a question on reasonable. But Rule 18.6.2 says, where a player in possession has prior opportunity, a field umpire shall award a free kick if that player does not correctly dispose of the ball immediately. So there's no question of how long you have. Now, if you haven't had prior opportunity, then you are given a reasonable amount of time. Well, is 360 reasonable? Is 540 reasonable?
Yeah. And that's what I always thought. I always just thought 360 automatic free kick.
Yeah.
That's what I thought. Yeah. And Bucks was big on this morning. He just says you get far too long with prior opportunity. You get too much time. Is essentially so. You got to narrow the amount of time that players are getting, because he thinks players know exactly what they're going to do with the footy mostly before they even pick it up. Where they're that highly skilled, that talented.
I don't agree with that.
They got good vision that before you pick the ball up, you are pretty conscious of where you're going to distribute the ball to. Now we're giving the benefit of the doubt to the player with the ball for too much time to make that decision. He wants that narrowed, and he thinks that will solve it. But, I mean, we always talk about holding the ball. We have done for years. It's the most confusing rule in the game. 1300 736 736 is the number. The other one that clearly has been the topic of conversation since Friday night, and sometimes the Friday night game sets the tone, was the Sullivan time-wasting free kick.
Yeah.
That man, Steve McBurney, explained that on the AFL platform today. Let's have a listen.
The whole world knows you've got to give the ball straight back.
No, Gerard, we're talking about a time-wasting free kick, and there was not 1 second wasted.
That's not the point. The point is
that's what
there's
the free
a process.
Kick was paid for.
No, there's a process. You got the ball, you give it straight back to the umpire.
So what you're going to do now, if I've got the ball, I'm just going to put it on the ground. And
that'll be time wasting too.
No, that'll be allowed, because it's not written in the rules that it can be. We see players do that all the time.
You've got to give it straight back to the umpire.
No, that is a shocking decision.
For 100 years, that's been 50 metres.
The more I hear that, the more I'm certain that's a poor decision. There are things in the game that waste a lot more time.
Yeah, like pushing
than
the
that.
backs.
Pushing the back. We got bounces that they can't bounce that are recalled. That's time wasting. That we got nominating rucks. That's
I accept
time
all
wasting.
those, but the whole footy world has grown up knowing you have to give the ball straight back to the umpire. It's not a relay. You don't give it to your mate and he gives it to his mate and he gives it to that next bloke. You give it straight back.
He just had a little. He's so focused on he's a young player.
Yeah,
so
but the umpire
focused
can't
on.
interpret
He's used to handballing. To Nick.
So if you played 300 games, you've got to give it straight back.
Well,
if you played 3 minutes,
so the issue is, I've seen others that haven't been paid where that has exactly happened.
That's a consistency issue.
And
it's not about this particular incident.
And it's not time wasting. There are things in the game that waste far more time than that. Bad bounces, the warning for 6, 6 and 6, goal reviews, nominating. There are so many things that waste more time than that. A man who joins us each and every Monday is one of the best in the business, SEN's chief sports reporter, Sammy Edmund. Sammy, thanks for stopping by.
Kane, good evening to you. Good to see you again, Gerard. Pleasure to be here.
You've been on the phone.
Been a busy day.
All right.
Give me the club involved.
All right, let's jump to this. The West Australian clubs want the Victorian teams to play home games in Perth as this competitive balance debate, discussion just rages across the country at the moment. Now, West Coast and Fremantle, there's a lot that goes into the competitive balance discussion. It's endless. But West Coast and Fremantle, in their mind, view travel as singularly the biggest disadvantage they face in the modern game, and something they believe sits at the centre of the league's pursuit of greater equity, which they've undertaken. Now, under a proposal discussed with the AFL, the Dockers and the Eagles are suggesting that 2 Victorian teams once every 5 years on a rotational basis play a home game at Optus Stadium and therefore one less game in Victoria. So the Perth-based clubs point to the fact that this year 4 Victorian teams play 17 games in their home state and another 3 play 16. Now the Dockers and the Eagles play 12 in WA given they get the 2 derbies. So Fremantle and West Coast, though, they're at pains to say they're not whinging. They're not blaming anyone. They realise the reality of the situation. They're not even demanding change, but instead they're collaboratively inquiring with the league about what they think is a pretty simple solution that would at least give them something back. They said, forget another gather round. That won't work in Perth for geographical reasons. It's been floated. Adelaide has made it their own as well. And broadly, the 2 clubs believe the fixture is born out of a state-based competition. So back in the VFL, when Gerard, an away game meant driving to a neighbouring suburb or Geelong at the very worst.
Used to stop off at Peter Spargo's
There you go.
BP restaurant in Lara because it was such a long way.
That's it. But now they point to the fact that competition's evolved. Where there's 2 teams on the West Coast, obviously, 14 others more than 3,000 kilometres away, yet the same fixturing philosophy applies. And as one chief executive said to me today, as a CEO of a Victorian-based club, the first thing you look at the fixture is, are we playing in Perth once or twice? And it's a massive win if you're only playing there once. And yet here are Fremantle and West Coast doing it every second week.
We only have to look at the numbers of people that have played 300 games for the West Coast to, essentially prove the fact that it's much more taxing.
Yeah. And look, I must add as well, even though they've done it for different reasons, all of them, Victorian clubs, Melbourne-based clubs playing home games in enemy territory isn't anything new. Like Melbourne played Brisbane at the Gabba as the home team for a period of time. North Melbourne did the same at the SCG for a long time. Yep. We've had Richmond play home games against Gold Coast in Cairns. And Cairns are actually currently trying to woo Hawthorn up to that region, assuming that the Tasmanian deal will end.
Suns are going to the Northern Territory.
Collingwood are wanting to play a home game against the Suns of the Gold Coast. And in fact, the Gold Coast, despite that being the jewel in their fixture commercially, are like, yeah, we're happy with that because it means that we get to travel 1 week less.
I absolutely love it. Like I'm trying to think of the ways to even things up, and I'm jealous I didn't think of this idea. This solves a lot of problems for them, and it's not the panacea, but it certainly would help.
How would it go commercially? Would they be able to sell it to Optus Stadium?
So it's the Victorian teams.
Well, this is all up for negotiation.
Home ground, so
they
they won't have any crowd advantage with that necessarily.
And so I'm not sure what they would get from a gate taking it up to something. It's all open to negotiation. But Collingwood are trying to get a home game as opposed to Marvel, where they might bank 400,000 or 500,000 out of the Gold Coast, where my understanding is they're pushing for $1 million from the city of Gold Coast. Now at the moment they're apart on terms, but they can make more than double by playing a game. Factor it into a mid-season break, whatever you want to do up on the Gold Coast.
Couple of questions. How would the Sydney-based teams feel about this, who have also been outspoken about competitive balance?
Well, I think the Perth-based clubs would say, well, the northern clubs have got their next-gen academies. They're geographically closer than what we are. So they're probably 2 things right off the bat. Now, we know the next-gen academies and the northern academies, rather, are going to change, and they're probably going to become uniform. Now, we're getting into other strands.
When you say uniform, how do you mean?
Well, at the moment, they're not even. So the northern academies and the next-gen academies, the bidding and how clubs acquire those players in those 2 particular drafts are very different. There'd be a mechanism, I've been told today, to uniform both. And obviously the clubs based out of Sydney and based out of Queensland with the Northern Academies are accepting the fact they're going to have to pay more. I think gone are the days where you bank a bunch of junk picks like Gold Coast did to get 4 first-rounders in. They don't mind either. They know that's going to happen.
I think paying more is reasonable, but trying to equate next-gen academies to Northern Academies is ridiculous.
How so?
Well, because Northern Academies bringing more people to the game, whereas the next gen academies, They don't. I mean, ultimately, they're just bringing kids who've got one parent from overseas.
Well, maybe, or they are from over. I mean, we're watching Mac Andrew run around. We're watching.
Yeah, but Mac Andrew was in the system.
Yeah, I know he was, but
they're all in the system.
Yeah.
So the original theory of next gen academies was to go and grab somebody who's not in the system, put them in an academy, and turn them into AFL players. It's not the way it's worked.
No, it's been gamed.
It's been totally gamed.
Absolutely. But then at the same time, the clubs who now bring those players in, like Fremantle did and West Coast have done, spend the money, spend the time. If a bid comes in the first 40, they can't match it. So then it's sayonara. So they're going to keep investing. Anyway, this all goes into the mix of what do you get, what do we get, what do they get?
What's been the response from the Victorian clubs?
I don't know. Okay. I don't know the answer.
It'll come down to the dollar one. And I mean, Collingwood have already said they're happy to travel to the Gold Coast. There's only another hour and a half to Western Australia, but it's revolving around dollars.
The money's going to come from the Perth government, is it?
Well, but I'm not sure. Are they going to put their hand up for that?
Well, that's it. And I don't think
is there $1 million there for a gate taking?
No, I'm not sure it's going to be sweetened with a City of Gold Coast style deal. I think the general proposal is you come here, you take the gate, and that's it. You have one extra trip. They're saying, not 6 extra, not 7 more or 8 more that we have to do every year. Just one extra.
1-300-736-736 for competitive balance. Breaking story here. The Perth-based clubs are suggesting that 2 Victorian clubs every 5 years play a home game in Perth to give West Coast and Fremantle 13 games there instead of 12 and to even things up in terms of travel. I like it. 0433 out 1116. I think it's more than fair.
Does Geelong now constitute travel? There's Geelong to the MCG, even though a couple of times it's their home game. That used to be the big travel game. Is that no longer a travel game?
They'd be keen to distance themselves from Melbourne. They went, look at us, we're right out here. We're right out in Geelong.
Absolutely.
The other thing is just getting a few early tweets back is that these big Victorian clubs have big supporter bases in the city of Perth and other cities around there who don't get to see their team that often. Who I reckon are sitting there going, well, we'd welcome this. The chance to see our club, one more time a year, be it every 5 years.
And just the realistic chance of this getting up, have you
probably slim to none.
No. Time to speak to the AFL
about
I
haven't
this?
Yet. No, I haven't yet. No, this is all very embryonic. This is very early. These are all things that are going into the melting pot. Again, we could spend 6 hours talking about the discussion of the competitive balance review, which is an enormous undertaking that Laura Kane and Andrew Dillon and Jeff Walsh and Josh Marnie have taken on, and it's provided a sounding board for clubs who have had to stay silent basically for so long. So there's a bit of what on the liver, but at the same time,
tell me North Melbourne versus the Saints. What's the crowd at Optus Stadium?
At Optus? Well, that would be a small crowd. But we're not talking about 2 Victorian clubs going over.
They'll be playing one of the
Perth-based clubs.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So it'd be North Melbourne against West Coast.
It'd be North's home game. So they would have the access to the ticket. So, I mean, the question probably still
And if West Coast are going well, then it would be largely full. Yeah. And then West Coast can make North Melbourne can make some money out of it.
I misread you. I thought you were talking about 2 Victorian clubs.
No, but 2 would go and they would play a West Coast and they would play a Fremantle as the home team. But,
do you know who will accept their sanction quicker than any person or player this year? And that's Blixarves.
Well, he already has.
Yeah. Oh, okay. How'd he get one?
Jai Clark the same.
How could he have only got one for that?
Because Lockie Whitfield was unharmed, was he not?
Did you see the egg on his cheek?
But played on, wasn't concussed. So just only good fortune.
Had a fat egg on his face, though.
Only good fortune saved them both. I'm not sure what Lockie Whitfield did in that game, but they were almost mirror images. Clark and Blitzarves got him.
Yeah, I had a bit more sympathy for Clark. I thought it was more in the kicking action, like directly involved in the play, where Blitzarves...
Well, he's doing what all players are instructed to do, is to block the player to stop him getting the 1-2, and Whitfield does that all the time.
All of a sudden it becomes a big game. No Blitzarves, who's been one of their best players for the year.
Clark.
He's been the go-to player in the ruck when the ruckman hasn't
Richmond,
fired.
I don't think, Gerard, at home.
Well, the Tigers game on the weekend was not at home, but it was pretty good on the weekend.
I think that was their grand final, Richmond.
Oh, yeah?
I think there might be a drop-off after that.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
A drop-off?
Back to
they haven't dropped off already?
No, well, back to the Richmond that we've known this year.
Well, they've got a few players to come back, to be fair to them. I think we talk about injuries, 157 players injured. They're responsible for about 150 of them.
Injuries, speaking of Collingwood.
Yeah, they're in a world of hurt. So they released an update about half an hour ago now. The big item in it is Jordan De Goey. Now, the Pies said this afternoon that after experiencing groin awareness during that round 10 match against Adelaide, further assessment has revealed that Jordan De Goey sustained This is one for Gerard. An acute rectus abdominal tendon tear. So he's working through a rehab program. That's another 3 to 4 weeks, though, for Jordan De Goey. So
That's a nasty one.
Nasty. So maybe another month for Geordie. Jamie Elliott's still out with the vascular issue. Will Hoskin-Elliott hamstring, still a week off even resuming training. Reef McInnes concussion. Mason Cox concussion, but also a grade 2 MCL strain. The scans are confirmed, so that's 6 weeks. Brody Mychek has a 2-week hammy, and he strained it again on his return. So make of that what you will.
I'll make of that what I will. They got that wrong.
Same hammy, 2 weeks after. So round 14 now at the earliest.
And there's been no criticism of that whatsoever, yet Connor Rosie and Port Adelaide get absolutely smashed. And I know it's more acute because it's the week that he did his hammy that he played. Mychek had 2 weeks, but very rare to have a 2-week hammy, Gerard. Yep. Very rare. It's always been 3 games. They've played him, he's done it again, and you would hope they put their hand up and say, we absolutely got this wrong, like Port Adelaide did with Connor Rosie.
It's usually 3 weeks, or if you're Djokovic, it's no weeks. But he's just delayed onset because he went out last night.
He's still the benchmark.
Yeah.
He's still the benchmark, Novak. Joe Richards, one of their bright sparks at Collingwood, so he had some foot soreness out of the game against the Dockers. Scans
That's bad luck because he was impressive.
4th metatarsal fracture, so that's long term. That's round 16 or 17 for him. Tom Mitchell plantar fasciitis, that's round 13 at the earliest. They get Jeremy Cameron back. He'll have to play forward now, you'd think. And Scott Pendlebury. Jeremy Howe, sorry. No, they won't get Jeremy Cameron back in. Jeremy Howe, they will. And then Scotty Pendlebury undergoing scans today on that on the bicep troubles from the weekend. He's had some rib issues as well, perhaps been a bit sore at times, but ultimately okay, we think. So
have those scans come back at all?
Not on the bicep, I don't believe, no.
So he had him today, but they haven't got the result.
Not to my knowledge.
Not publicly got it.
Oh, I think he's okay. I think he's going to be good.
He'll be okay. Dustin Martin slated to play game 300 when?
Yeah, so 2 weeks from now. So that's the Adelaide Oval round 13 against the Crows, although, of course, as has been speculated upon, could yet be managed to ensure the MCG plays host to this.
Do you think they will do that?
I don't know, because they've been hit by injury as well. Have they got the luxury of resting him from Milestone? I'm honestly not sure how that's going to play out. If it is to go that way at the MCG, it'll be against Hawthorn the following week. Regardless, in the background and amongst all this, you've got the AFL's preference for the media-shy superstar Dustin Martin to conduct a press conference of sorts as it looks to, enforce the media access clauses written into its new collective bargaining agreement. Meanwhile, Richmond, Gerard, opposed to a Martin press conference, pointing to the fact this isn't what he would want, nor would it bring the best out in him. So does it matter if we don't hear from Dustin Martin on a more formal media stage on the eve of a big milestone?
I was thinking about this today, and ultimately, we'd all love to hear from Dusty, but Dusty's not interested in talking to us, and he's been that way for 15 years. There's probably an argument that's clashing with mental health if you wanted to go down that track. What I would much prefer the AFL do is enforce it on people who are comfortable in the media. Super producer, Sammy, has it got any better this year, the access to players?
No.
I'm seeing a shake of the head. So, Jay Allen, I couldn't give a stuff about Dustin Martin. He is what he is and has been. But make good your promise to us at the start of the year that access to players will be far better than it was going to be last year.
So this year they've hung fines over the players and clubs as a deterrent. So $10,000 for a player, $20,000 for a club under a worst case, horrifically case scenario whereby they repeatedly refuse to conduct interviews. And you can't ever see a situation though where a player's going to be fined. They're not going to turn around and
why
find
the
Dusty
AFL
Martin.
are going to fight this argument. You can't win this argument.
They're not going to find Dusty.
Dusty
one of the
turns
most
up and
decorated
says yes,
players.
no, yes, no, yes, no. See you later. Just to make good on your promise, though, for the wider community. Most of the players, if they've got a book to sell or they're getting paid $5,000 to go out in the public, they're happy to speak. Well, part of the deal is you come on radio and TV, etc.
But if they're happy to speak, they speak, don't they? Aren't we right to assume that if they don't, they're not comfortable in the space?
No, I think that just doesn't suit their diary.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately, we haven't had any difference from this year to last year, and yet that's what the big announcement was. It
was written into the clause.
Chad Warner, I mean, the talk is that he's put contract talks on hold. He hasn't really, because he's, end of next year? Sam?
End of 25, yeah.
End of 25. It's amazing. He's got a long time to go, so he hasn't put them on hold. So just relax, Sydney fans. But Gavin Bell, GM of football at West Coast, has said that if he wants to return home, they'd love to have him. And that's
that shocks me.
That's been quite
really.
Yeah, they could have picked him, Jared. He went to slip to pick 39.
They'd be open to discussions, wouldn't they?
No, but it's still unusual to
That's
make
a big
that
concession.
claim. Usually you might say, look, he's a contracted player to Sydney. We don't talk about contracted players.
Oh, jeez.
But Well, I mean, what is he worth?
Well, this is the thing, and this is why you're not re-signing in the near
He'd be
future for love or
stupid to
money.
re-sign.
What manager would you have if you sign on the dotted line now? You are on a rocket ship bound for God knows where, and you're going to re-sign now.
Glory.
You're kidding. You're re-signing if it was me, well into next year, even if you've got every intention of staying, because every week that goes by, it's just a little cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. You're adding value week to week.
There is only so much a club can offer, though, ultimately, because there's 30 people have got to go in. So I'm not sure. I mean, they could all say, we'll give you maximum. Here's your maximum. This is all we can afford.
That's true.
And there's 5 years right now. That's all we can. Now, West Coast are in a different stratosphere because they're on the rebuild. You're going to get 200 more over there. But what you're going to do here in the next 3-4 years, you're going to get an opportunity to create history.
Yeah. But we've seen them manipulate lists over time too. You know, they can shuffle things around in the background. It might not be hundreds of thousands of dollars difference, but this will be his next contract will be huge.
Are we going to get to the point where we're genuinely floored by a contract? Like I was genuinely floored by the Buddy one, and that's the obvious one where it was so surprising. Like the 10-year mark was the surprise. Are we getting where can it get to?
Well, it can only be numbers now because the length the length can't be a surprise.
You don't think we'll see like 15 years at
no,
you don't
not
reckon?
15, not 15.
What would you offer?
Ultimately, they're 3 years in before they can negotiate.
So Gazy, when you're away, Andy, when you're away, said, I would. I don't know if he said I would, but should a club give Harley Reid 12 years at 25 mil? That's two and a half.
2 and a bit a year.
Yeah, 2 and a bit a year.
Yeah.
And so that would blow me away.
Yeah.
But then you think, well, is it that much out of the question?
You know, the problem with that is that we were blown away with Alistair Lynch's first year contract, and he got, I think, $200,000
for 10.
They actually felt sorry for him about 4 years, and even though he slept through half of it, which is Lynch's own story, because the numbers just go through the roof. I mean, a contract 10 years ago. With the exception of Buddy, I mean, his was $1 million. But,
so for Reid, you're suggesting that may not be this. Like it looks amazing now.
$2 million seems amazing.
It may not be the smartest thing in 8 years.
It may not be. I mean, the revenue rates may go through the roof again in 5 years.
Like Jamar on the open market, he did re-sign for 2. What could he have commanded from it? We saw what Sydney offered Aaron Norton, and then you can't tell.
What did they offer Aaron Norton?
It was double-figure tenure, double-figure salary, whatever it was. And then Sam Taylor at GWS out at the end of next year, West Australian lad. You can't tell me West Coast just wouldn't back up the truck for a Sam Taylor to get him in the door.
And the Wiedering offers that have been reported for eight years at 1.5,
at the Saints.
And he's not that young in terms of footballing terms. He's been around for a while.
Now, I think we talked about this prior to I went away. I think we're going to see some deals where not so much we're shocked at the numbers, but we're just shocked that it doesn't make sense for a club to go down that track outside of going to the draft.
Yeah. So more like not your lesser lights, but a Hugh McCluggage type is going to get unbelievable.
Are they going to change the fortune of your footy club?
Yeah. Is Hugh McCluggage going to? Probably not.
The figure that was widely settled on, for what it's worth, look, take these things with a grain of salt, for Aaron Norton was $11 million over 10 years, or $12 million over 10 years. So it was somewhere around there. Double figure tenure, double figure in the millions.
Wasn't it a bonus that he didn't do his ACL on the weekend?
Oh, he's dodged.
And that's 2 now. Coniglio looked like he was gone. And Norton looked like he was gone and got away with an MCL.
Just on Coniglio, we had Toby Green on this morning, not speaking positively at all. A range between 4 and 12.
Yeah, so check with the Giants today. He'll see a specialist tomorrow. So they've had a few scans on this shoulder as well. They still don't know whether it's short-term or long-term. Now, I think what that means is, do we need to operate now, or can we afford to hold off until the back end of the year? And it might be a risk that he has to, a high-wire act he needs to negotiate for the remainder of this year. So the shoulders are always difficult ones, aren't they? Do you get it done now? Do you get it done later? Does it keep popping out or whatever? But pretty painful for him. And there's going to be some time on the sidelines. Just
I reckon what they'll do is they'll wait 4 to 5, maybe 6 weeks.
See how it settles.
See if it settles. If it doesn't, operate. If it settles, well, let's take the risk.